Hello to everybody who's already online. Lovely to see you all this evening. See you. Please let us know where you've tuned in from, where you are sitting at the moment, whether it's morning or evening or nighttime. Just put a little message in the chat letting us know where you are from and how you came to be with us this evening. And I'd love to hear from you and where you are all joining us from. That would be very, very nice, so we can get to know one another. I'm speaking to you obviously from Cape Town. I know that our panelists are in various places. Mehak, I'm not sure where you are. Hello, Dr. Mr. Timmermans. Good to see you. I often see you at these events, so good to see you again. Leavenworth in the United States, not far from Seattle. Fantastic. I hope it's not as cold as it was in Boston last week. I've just got back from there and I've never experienced cold like it. Hello, Surabi, welcome. So we've got people from India, which is lovely. I think it's late at night, although it's such a vast continent, I wouldn't know, but I know for Dr. Navras and for Mehak, it's 10:30 at night, I think. New York City, hello, I was there, it's a wonderful place. What's where WA? Is that Western Australia? Did I miss something there? Let me go and have a look. Who is that now? Oh, Washington State. Okay, hello. Fantastic. Oh, it's lovely to have such an international audience tonight. Really exciting. I think we'll just wait a few more minutes for some more people to come online. Shalom, Sonia. Mashlom. I hope you are well. Sonia from Israel, Ida Faye Mervis from Cape Town. Lovely to have the support from our locals. And I'm sure that this is going to be a really interesting talk for all of you. New York City, eager to hear the program, a friend of Navras's. Navras, you've got friends here looking after you. Brooklyn, hello, Aliyah, how are you? I walked across the Brooklyn Bridge last week, so that was wonderful. Hi, Carol, good to see you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's really wonderful. I think if you can just let me know, Justine, when you think that most people who are going to log on are here. So, and then we can sort of begin proceedings formally, but it's really wonderful to see so many people and so many different people here. Hi, Samantha, good to see you. London, lovely. Same time zone, that's good. And I think I'll ask Justine to just put our details up, if you would, Justine. So if people want to become part of our database, they can email us or they can log on to our webpage and make themselves part of our family, which would be really, really nice, I think. Excellent. Okay. All right, I think we, it's 7:05 and 7 o'clock was starting time, so I don't think we can delay any more. So I'm going to start the formal proceedings and I'm going to welcome all of you and thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to have such an international group here this evening. And I would like to extend a very special and a very warm welcome to Dr. Navras Aafreedi and to Mehak Burza, both of whom will address us this evening. So the program will be that I will introduce Dr. Aafreedi and he will give his address. And then afterwards, my colleague, Oli Barnett, will introduce Mehak Burza and then she will give her address. Please, during the talks, if there are questions, please pop your questions into the chat, because there will be, after both presentations, a Q&A. So feel free to put your questions into the chat. Now, as one of the most complex and diverse democracies in the world, India is a country that faces divisions, many divisions, and with those divisions come conflicts. Learning about the Holocaust and looking at the impact that it had on societies, the political missteps that took place, the failure of leadership that took place, all have relevance for India today. And it is this relevance that Dr. Navras Aafreedi will share with us tonight. Dr. Aafreedi is an assistant professor in history at the Presidency University, Kolkata, where he teaches an MA course, A History of Mass Violence, the 20th Century to the Present, among several other courses. He is the author of the monograph, Jews, Judaizing Movements, and Traditions of Israelite Descent in South Asia. He has written papers in peer-reviewed journals and contributed chapters to academic literature in his field. Other than in English, his writings have also appeared in German, Spanish, and Urdu. He writes on genocide studies, Indo-Judaic studies, interfaith relations, anti-Semitism studies, and Jewish literary history with a focus on South Asia. He has spoken at scholarly forums on every continent apart from South America. South America must get on their bicycles and invite him, and has held visiting fellowships at the universities of Tel Aviv and Sydney, and at the Woolf Institute, Cambridge in the UK. He was scholar in residence at St. John's College, Oxford, with the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, working on curriculum development in critical anti-Semitism studies. A lover of poetry, a generous and collegial academic, and a devoted father of two beautiful young children, it is with great pleasure that I invite Dr. Aafreedi to talk to us tonight on the topic Holocaust in India and its relevance for the country. Over to you, Dr. Aafreedi.
Thank you so much, Ms. Heckner, for your very generous introduction. I am trying to switch on my video, but I still need to be permitted to do so by the host.
Justine, can you help Dr. Aafreedi switch on his video, please?
Okay.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
It's such a privilege to be speaking today under the auspices of the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center. I just can't thank you enough for this opportunity. Absolutely delighted. And I'll just quickly try to share my screen so that I can commence my presentation. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am most grateful to Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center for inviting me to speak. I will be speaking to you on Holocaust education in India and its relevance for the country. My presentation will be divided into 5 parts. An overview of the state of Holocaust education in India, the importance of Holocaust education, its relevance for India in particular, my work for the promotion of Holocaust education in India, and some recommendations for raising Holocaust awareness in India. National Socialism or Nazism finds mention in the Indian national curricula for school education and in the syllabus for the National Eligibility Test for lectureships in history conducted by the University Grants Commission for aspirants of tertiary level academic positions. But the mention of the Holocaust is absent in both. Not all books mention Jews as the victims of Nazi rule. The Nazi genocide against Jews is generally nothing more than a mere passing reference. As far as the textbooks are concerned, Holocaust is rarely ever mentioned by name. Even if the Holocaust finds a passing reference in a discussion of National Socialism or National Socialists, it is often de-Judaized, lest it be perceived as an unwanted and unfair focus on the plight of just one particular section of victims, while the victim groups included Blacks, Gypsies, homosexuals, Slavs, etc. Anne Roth says that transforming empirical Holocaust victims into a rhetorical figure is moreover unethical because it effaces the actual victimization experiences of real, non-metaphoric Jews. Another problem is the portrayal of Adolf Hitler as the personification of National Socialism and as the real protagonist in all major historical events of that period, rather than just one actor in a play with often unintended results, as Bashir Khan Banerjee and George Stober put it. This is achieved by presenting the historical events linked to his name as intentional and occurring in accordance to his will. The National Council of Educational Research and Training textbook for year 9 from 2006 depicts Hitler's success as indicative of special personal qualities used in a manipulative manner. These traits are presented by other books not merely as capabilities, but as positive qualities. A 2005 textbook for year 12, published by a private publishing house, Saraswati House, even strikes a tone of admiration. While the Nazi rule is validated in general, when it comes to the characterization of Hitler, the tone of the text varies from profound condemnation to appreciation and admiration. At the tertiary level, the Holocaust figures merely as a component or a unit in certain courses at a few institutions, but the only university to offer a full postgraduate course focused on the Holocaust is Presidency University, Kolkata. The relevance of Holocaust remembrance and its education for societies with no connection to the Holocaust lies in the fact that the Holocaust is the ideal case study for mass violence studies for such societies, as they can draw lessons from it while retaining their objectivity, because it did not involve any section of their own society. If any episode of mass violence from their history is taught, it would flare up passions as whichever community emerges as the perpetrator would object to it. There can be many other instances of mass violence in history with no connection to such societies, but the Holocaust stands out because of its scale and magnitude. The UNESCO Policy Guide on Holocaust Education and Genocide Prevention points out that, quote, in sensitive contexts, examining one or more situations of genocide or mass atrocity from another time and place, such as the Holocaust, may help learners engage in important conversations about contentious aspects of their own communities' past, unquote. There are a number of lessons that can be drawn from the Holocaust, one of them being that democide has the potential to lead to genocide, and that genocide is destructive, not just to the targeted population in a particular society, but to the rest of the society as well, even if there is a difference in the nature of the ruin. It is extremely important to realize that we are all vulnerable and that we need to be vigilant, for democracy is fragile. We still don't know how effective Holocaust education is when it comes to genocide prevention. However, what we do know is that in the post-World War II period, street mass violence without war, interstate or civil, has been experienced only in the countries that did not teach about the Holocaust and not in the ones that did. We have examples of countries that have appropriately responded to mass violence by investing in Holocaust and genocide education, Holocaust remembrance and memorialization, and reconciliation. This is something that did not happen in India and Pakistan, despite the terrible genocidal violence experienced in the region during the partition of British India in 1947. The mass violence perpetrated in India and Pakistan at that time, in which the estimated number of the massacred ranges from 1 to 2 million, was neither recognized as a genocide nor a civil war. There is still no proper museum devoted to the 1947 mass violence, except the Partition Museum in Amritsar in Punjab, India, opened in its town hall in 2016, and the Kolkata Partition Museum in West Bengal, India, which came to exist in cyberspace in 2018 and still does not have a physical existence. The Kolkata Partition Museum is inspired by the Holocaust memorials of Berlin, as mentioned on its website. My guess is that the Partition Museum of Amritsar too draws its inspiration from Holocaust museums and memorials. Both these museums are civil society initiatives and not state-sponsored. Homicide does not go unpunished in India, but massacres generally do, as evident from the dismal rate of conviction. After the Second World War, those accused of war crimes and genocide were put on trial in Nuremberg and Tokyo. The most famous of such trials being that of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. But there were no such trials of those who perpetrated genocidal violence at the time of the partition of British India in 1947. Since independence in 1947, India has witnessed a number of massacres. Professor Paul R. Brass points out that, quote, large-scale violent events in which mostly Muslims are killed, mostly by the police, get classified in the press, by the authorities, and by the public as riots rather than pogroms, unquote. A study done by human rights lawyers Preeta Jha, Anubha Rastogi, Surur Mandir, and activist Rekha Kohli found that cases filed after mass violence in India are summarily closed in a very high proportion. That is, the state decides not to press charges against anybody and sets the case aside. In my assessment, this undoubtedly gives rise to a sense of impunity among the genocidists, which only emboldens them. Hence, it is not surprising that in India, we live with the constant fear of the outbreak of mob violence, with the tremendous potential to escalate into mass violence. Low-scale mob violence is endemic and cyclic in nature in India and intertwined with its electoral politics. This has brought us to the stage that instead of drawing lessons from the Holocaust aimed at genocide prevention, we have come to look at the Holocaust as a model to emulate, as reflected in the recent calls for genocide against Muslims in India. Why India so badly needs Holocaust education is clearly evident from the fallout of its absence in the country. Absence of the education of Jewish history and the Holocaust, compounded by the lack of credible sources of information on Jews in vernaculars, has led to widespread ignorance of who the Jews are and how they suffered during the Holocaust. The domestication, normalization, popularization, and commercialization of Hitler only aggravate the situation, leading to the justification of the perpetration of the Holocaust in public perception. This makes the ignorant masses particularly susceptible to the anti-minority propaganda unleashed by the right wing, inspired by Nazi and fascist ideologies. It is worth noting that Nazi propagandists were active in India from 1933 to 1939. Newspapers such as Spirit of the Times, Salare Hind, Princely India, Karnatak Bandhu, Lokhandi Morcha, and Trikal carried direct Nazi propaganda. The propagandists tried to influence both the Hindus and the Muslims. They raised the issue of Palestine to win Muslim support. To win Hindu support, they highlighted the Nazi symbol of the swastika and the Aryan race theory because they were aware that the swastika is an ancient Hindu symbol and the North Indians consider themselves Aryan. They also tried to impress upon them that India belonged to them alone and not to the Muslims, and other communities such as Germany belonged only to Germans and not to the Jews who were outsiders. The Nazis operated in India through various cultural and business organizations, both Indian and European. Hindu nationalist ideologue Vinayak Damodar Savarkar labeled Jawaharlal Nehru's resolution in support of the Jewish refugees and the Diwan of Cochin's contemplation about granting refuge to Jews fleeing Nazi Europe as the suicidal generosity forefathers had been guilty of in other cases of inviting colonies of non-Hindus to India. Although Savarkar had described the Indian Jews as harmless due to their small numbers and absence of proselytizing tendencies, he did not hesitate in making these statements. He drew comparisons between the Jews of Germany and the Muslims of India while accusing them of extraterritorial loyalties. Today, we the Hindus, within quotation marks, he wrote, today we the Hindus from Kashmir to Madras and Sindh to Assam will be a nation by ourselves, while the Indian Muslims are on the whole more inclined to identify themselves and their interests with Muslims outside India than Hindus who live next door, like the Jews in Germany. Savarkar openly spoke in defense of the Nazis and the fascists. After becoming the president of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, his rhetoric against Muslims turned increasingly radical and distinctly unpleasant. In a speech he made on October 14, 1938, he presented the Nazi treatment of Jews in Germany as a model to emulate to solve the Muslim problem in India. Within quotation marks, a nation is formed by a majority living therein. What did the Jews do in Germany? They, being in minority, were driven out from Germany, unquote. This provides a context to a call for genocide against Muslims in India made during a 3-day conference called Dharma Sansad, which literally means religious parliament, held in Haridwar in Uttarakhand from December 17 to 19, 2021. A similar call is made by several speakers in a number of videos available on YouTube, but in innuendos and euphemisms. Such videos attract views in hundreds of thousands. Professor Arjun Appadurai, who has been working on the vicious cycle of nationalism and violence for more than 2 decades, finds in the Haridwar Dharma Sansad, quote, a strong parallel with the infamous Wannsee Conference of January 1942, when the final solution was made into official Nazi policy. The fact that this and subsequent calls to general war against Muslims were organized by men and women in saffron makes a good deal of sense, since the Sadhu Akhada side of the BJP RSS machine has been steadily playing the role of outfits like the Waffen SS under the Nazis and has emerged as the tip of the spear, consisting of various thugs, mobs, and militias seeking a centralized leadership, unquote. Together, these factors provide conditions conducive for anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and communalism to thrive in India. What accounts for the popularity of Adolf Hitler in India is both the ignorance and awareness of the Holocaust. The awareness of the Holocaust makes him popular among the anti-Semites in certain sections of Muslims and Islamophobes among the Hindu nationalists. Both Islamist anti-Semites and Hindu nationalist Islamophobes admired him for the genocide he perpetrated on the Jews. The Hindu nationalist Islamophobes' admiration for Hitler is mediated by their attitude towards Muslims in India and does not originate in any hatred for Jews, unlike the Islamist anti-Semites' admiration for him, many of whom would like to do to the Jews exactly what the Nazis did to the Jews under Hitler's leadership. The rise in the popularity of Hitler is directly proportional to that of Nathuram Godse, Mahatma Gandhi's assassin, and inversely proportional to the decline in Gandhi's popularity in India. It is noteworthy that when Nathuram Godse assassinated Mahatma Gandhi, he assumed that a significant section of Hindus and Sikhs, particularly refugees, would rise in his support, just the way the public had compelled the British to bow to their pressure at the time of the trial of the captured soldiers of the Indian National Army, which under the leadership of Subhash Chandra Bose had fought the British Army during the Second World War. On the contrary, the public mood swung against Godse in a massive and violent storm of revulsion, as described by Godse's biographer, Dhirendra Kumar Jha. However, 74 years later, on Mahatma Gandhi's birth anniversary last year, 2021, hashtag Nathuram Godse Zindabad, that is, long live Nathuram Godse, was one of the top trends on Twitter for several hours. More than a dozen statues of Nathuram Godse, Mahatma Gandhi's assassin, have been erected across the country. The New York Times reported on 4th February 2020 that several Hindu temples are being converted into temples dedicated to Godse. The New York Times mentioned in the same report that the government of Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state, proposed changing the name of Meerut, a city of 1.57 million, to Godse City. There has been an enactment of Mahatma Gandhi's assassination to great cheer and several attacks on his memorials, defacement of his pictures, and decapitation of a statue of his. Between 1999 and 2004, some 43% of Indians supported rule by a strong leader. This figure rose to 56% between 2010 and 2014. Recent Pew surveys have found Indians to be the most ardent supporters of autocratic rule. The latest display of it can be seen in the overwhelming Hindu nationalist support for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. However, the strange phenomenon of Hitler's popularity in India cannot be dismissed simply as an obsession with and a craving for strong leadership. We should all be alarmed if the world's most populous democracy, home to 1/6 of humankind, with the largest diaspora in the world, comes to admire Hitler more than any other non-Indian leader and is hardly aware of the Holocaust. The few who are not ignorant of the Holocaust often condone it, for they consider it a necessary collateral damage for the greater good of the German nation, or the only wrongdoing by Hitler. The fact that Hitler is gaining popularity in a country where anti-Semitism remains largely unknown even today, except for certain sections of its population, is paradoxical. It is symptomatic of a lot that is wrong with our society today, and if we ignore it, we do so at our own peril. The sales of Mein Kampf in India have increased to the tune of 15% in just a decade. Free of copyright in India, Mein Kampf is printed by half a dozen publishers. Hundreds of thousands of its copies have been sold in the last 2 decades, and a steady rise in its demand has been registered. Hitler's popularity is not confined to his autobiography. All of his memorabilia sell like hotcakes. There have also been a number of films named after Hitler in India's various languages. The films, except Gandhi to Hitler, released in 2011, neither are biopics on Hitler nor depict Hitler as a character. It is just that in all of these films, the lovable protagonist, because of his authoritarian nature, is called Hitler. Given how ignorant Indians generally are of the Holocaust, it seems appropriate to them to call anyone who comes across as too bossy Hitler. An important example is the popular Hindi daily soap opera, Hitler Didi. Didi in Hindi is a respectful form of address for elder sister. Its 448 episodes were broadcast from 2011 to 2013 on the Hindi satellite television channel ZTV and is currently available on the OTT platform Z5. It is the protagonist, a girl in Delhi, burdened with the responsibility of providing for her family as the sole breadwinner, who has been called Hitler just because of her being a strict disciplinarian. According to the TRP ratings, it was the fourth most popular show in India. It was later broadcast also in Pakistan, the fountainhead of Urdu anti-Semitic rhetoric, and its dubbed Farsi version in Iran, notorious for holding Holocaust cartoon contests and Holocaust denial conferences. In North America and Europe, it was aired with the title General Didi instead of the original title because of the Anti-Defamation League's objection to the use of Hitler in the title. However, the objection was overlooked by Z Entertainment Enterprises when its Arabic version was broadcast to the Arab world on Z Alwan, a Dubai-based satellite television channel from December 17, 2014, under the title Och the Hitler. The Anti-Defamation League expressed its disappointment with the return of Adolf Hitler's name in the title in a statement it posted on its website within a fortnight of that. Holocaust scholar Alvin H. Rosenfeld rightly points out that, quote, Hitler has become an allegorical as well as an historical figure, a presence that summons the attention of this generation and undoubtedly will continue to be a compelling presence for years to come. While remains a threatening figure on one level, on another, he is undergoing a figurative process of domestication and normalization, which has the effect of disconnecting him from the criminal regime he established and the catastrophes he wrought. Unquote. Indians and Pakistanis with the first name Hitler have a strong presence on the social networking site Facebook. They are generally those who associate aggression with masculinity and perceive it as a virtue. Their Facebook posts generally betray their right-wing leanings. Some of them cannot even spell the name Hitler correctly, but it is not enough to keep them from using it for themselves on social media. So strong is their admiration for him. Rosenfeld explains the strange phenomenon of Hitler's popularity in the following words, quote, such a figure who seems to be able to satisfy at one and the same time our fantasies for power, madness, money, sex, murder, politics, pageantry, ambition, and art, obviously has appeal. It is not an appeal that will help us better understand the Nazi persecution and slaughter of the Jews, but then it is not meant to. Rather, it is meant to fascinate us with the Holocaust, to some degree even to entertain us with it, and ultimately to distract us from it by turning it into something else, a source of vicarious danger and excitement, a new mythology of sometimes pleasurable, sometimes violent sensations, unquote. Holocaust as a model to emulate. The Islamist anti-Semites try to find validation for their genocidal vision for Jews in a highly controversial hadith, Sahih Bukhari, which according to certain interpretations contains the prophecy of the killing of the Dajjal, Antichrist, followed by the annihilation of his Jewish followers. In contrast, the Hindu nationalist Islamophobic admirers of Hitler are Philo-Semites, who hold the Jewish state of Israel in high esteem for what they perceive as its having put the Arab Muslim foes, including both the hostile Arab neighbors and the Arab Muslim minority within Israel, in their place. They see the Holocaust as a model to emulate, as illustrated by recent open, explicit calls for genocide against Muslims in India, home to the third largest Muslim population in the world, estimated to be 213 million by Pew Research Center. The dream of an India free of Islam, and some of them, such as Yati Narsinghanand, consider Muslims as demons. This inspired an eminent Indian Muslim journalist, Said Naqvi to write a play, The Muslim Vanishes, published around a month ago, in which he imagines a Muslim-free India. It was primarily from the 2,000 European Jews who found refuge in India that Indians, including the Jews among them, learned about the Holocaust, and not from the press in India, which was at that time focused on reporting the struggle for national independence from the British and gave little space to news of the then ongoing Holocaust. It is hard to find a book on the Holocaust in any Indian language, while the autobiography of Hitler and his biographies are omnipresent in almost every major Indian language for as little as less than $1. The Holocaust is seldom more than a mere passing reference, if it figures at all, in the history syllabus at the secondary level of education in India. During the Cold War, India, as an active member of the non-aligned movement, in its desire to come across as neutral, hesitated to accept the Holocaust as a historical fact, perceiving it as a version of history written by the victors and imposed on the losers of the war. In this context, as Banerjee and Stover point out, quote, anti-Semitic Nazi arguments were reproduced as historical facts and Jews were presented as culprits, unquote. Eminent Holocaust scholar Dina Porat underscores the need for the education of Jewish history in general, and not just Holocaust education, to make the students completely understand why the colossal tragedy took place and not just how. Quote, Holocaust education has also not yet proved itself to be a barrier against anti-Semitism. For youngsters whose ignorance is coupled by naivete, often raise questions such as these. Why the Jews? Why all the Jews? What's wrong with them? Was their murder really initiated without any logical reason or other good motive? 6 million? How indeed did so many Jews who do not seem to be helpless today allow this to be done to them? Unquote. Only education in Jewish history can answer such questions, hence so badly needed. Robert Wistrich cautioned us that the ignorance about Judaism and Jewish history is, of course, a particularly fertile breeding ground for anti-Semitism. And in 2004, the United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan rightly said that the rise of anti-Semitism anywhere is a threat to people everywhere. Thus, in fighting anti-Semitism, we fight for the future of all humanity. Widespread ignorance of the Holocaust and the Jewish history make people susceptible to anti-Semitic propaganda aimed at denying or minimizing or trivializing the Holocaust. Expressions of anti-Semitism in India range from Holocaust denial and minimization by certain sections of Muslims to indulgence in competitive victimhood by Hindu nationalists, amounting to Holocaust obfuscation and its trivialization, and Holocaust inversion in the press, for which certain sections of both Muslims and left liberals are guilty. Abuse of Holocaust memory as a trope is common in the Hindu nationalist tirade against Islamism, and to underscore the Hindu magnanimity in granting shelter to Jews by particularly emphasizing that the Jews were never tolerated for centuries by any nation other than Hindu India. Unlike the Islamists, they do not deny the Holocaust. On the contrary, they acknowledge the figure of 6 million, but claim that the Hindus experienced a genocide spanning centuries, far bigger in scale and magnitude than any other genocide, including the Holocaust. Their estimates of Hindus murdered during this alleged centuries-long genocide range from 75 million to 536 million. The interesting thing is that there is an intersectionality of anti-Semitism and philo-Zionism in the Hindu nationalist discourse. The same Hindu nationalists who indulge in anti-Semitism also admire the state of Israel, not for its ancient Judean civilization or its resilience and achievements in spite of adverse conditions, but for what they perceive to be its high-handedness against their common enemy, the Muslims, as the Hindu nationalists perceived them. Other manifestations of anti-Semitism include the abuse of the history of Indian Jews to underscore the magnanimity and generosity of the Indian nation in giving refuge and safe haven to the persecuted Jews, and in certain sections of Muslims, the metaphorical use of the word Yahudi as a pejorative. It is worth mentioning here that numerically, the strongest of the Jewish communities in India, the Bene Israel, never used the term Yahudi for themselves in their centuries-long presence in India. Remedial measures. I've been trying to promote the study of global Jewish history, including the history of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, for more than a decade in India, with some degree of success. In 2009, I organized a Holocaust film retrospective in Lucknow, a major center of both Muslim scholarship and Islamist anti-Semitic rhetoric, and the administrative capital of Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state. Altogether, 46 films were screened in a span of 14 days in 3 phases at 5 different venues, including the 2 biggest universities there and a secondary school with the largest number of students in the world. The films were seen by more than 3,000 people. The event was organized with some financial support from the Center for Communication and Development Studies, Pune, under its youth outreach program called Open Space. I also held Holocaust poster exhibitions at universities in Lucknow, Greater Noida, a town in the National Capital Region of Delhi, and Kolkata, and international multidisciplinary academic conferences at universities in Sonipat, another town in the National Capital Region of Delhi, and Kolkata. I was successful in inspiring my students to stage a Holocaust-themed play in 2015 at Gautam Buddha University, where I used to teach prior to joining the Presidency University in Kolkata. This play happened to be the first ever Hindi language play on the Holocaust. And it was covered, there were stories done on it by both San Diego Jewish World and United with Israel. In 2016, Presidency University in Kolkata permitted me to launch courses in Holocaust studies and global Jewish history, the only such courses in the region. I have guest edited special issues of the online magazine Café de Census on India's response to the Holocaust and its perception of Hitler and hatred and mass violence, lessons from history, and have published extensively in both peer-reviewed publications and popular media, drawing attention to the need for Holocaust education in India. In 2021, I and political scientist Priya Singh jointly published a book with Routledge titled Conceptualizing Mass Violence, Representations, Recollections, and Reinterpretations, with contributions from scholars of 8 countries with the aim of stimulating Indian scholarly and academic interest in Holocaust studies. 10 of its 19 chapters are focused on the Holocaust and its education. The following steps can go a long way in raising awareness of the Holocaust in India, so badly needed. Launch of a training program in Holocaust education for secondary level teachers, introduction of Holocaust and genocide studies at the secondary level of education through the incorporation of the subject in the syllabi of the various national boards of education, publication of books on the Holocaust for secondary level education in South Asian languages, establishment of faculty positions in Holocaust studies at premier institutions of higher education, translation of Holocaust literature and dubbing of Holocaust cinema into Indian languages, establishment of Holocaust museums in major cities, public commemoration of the International Holocaust Memorial Day. Thank you.
Wow.
I would be glad to answer any questions that there might be.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Aafreedi, we will take questions, but I think we'll do that perhaps after Mehak's talk so that we can get people asking questions on both talks, but that was absolutely an exceptional talk. Thank you so very much. I've got pages and pages and pages of notes here. So if nobody else has questions, I certainly do. Please, participants, do write your questions in the chat that we can actually give to Dr. Aafreedi later on. And now I'm going to hand over to Orly Barnett. Thank you, Orly, if you will introduce Mehak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you so much, Professor Aafreedi, for your presentation. Our next speaker is Mehak Burza. Ms. Burza is currently one of the board of directors and the head of Global Holocaust and Religion Studies at the Global Center for Religious Research in Denver, USA. She is also a doctoral Holocaust researcher at the Department of English at Jamia University in New Delhi, India, and she has submitted her thesis entitled Literary Representations of the Holocaust in Assessment. Mehak's primary scholarly interests include Holocaust and genocide studies, Jewish studies, and gender identity and trauma studies. As an assistant professor of English, she has taught English literature at the University of Delhi. She has presented her research papers at various institutions and universities in the United States and India, and has published in various journals her research paper, book reviews, translations, and poetry. On a personal note, Linda and I met Mehak through the Teach the Shoah organization, which uses the art of storytelling to keep the testimony of Holocaust survivors alive. And Mehak will, in her next engagement, will be Teach the Shoah's featured storyteller in their upcoming webinar on Tuesday, 8th of March at 8 p.m. South African and Israel time. And we would also like to extend a warm welcome to our wonderful storytelling coach, Jennifer Zinikoff, who is with us here tonight as well. Mehak, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Over to you.
Thank you, Orly, for that wonderful introduction. I would now like to share my screen. I hope it's visible. Hello, everyone. It is indeed an honor to have the opportunity to address such a diverse audience. Foremost, I thank Ms. Heather Blumenthal, the director at the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Center, for giving me the opportunity to present my research. Next on the list are, of course, Orly and Linda, the organizing backbones, without whom it would be next to impossible to put up together this intercontinental webinar. I also express my gratitude to Professor Aafreedi for his collaboration in the talk. My presentation today is structured into two parts. In the first part, I'll give you a brief overview of my doctoral research that I have recently submitted. The second part will then focus on the crossroads between India and the Holocaust, something that is stemmed from my own experiences as a doctoral researcher, as well as an English educator in the University of Delhi. Now, as I embarked upon this journey of research, one of the fundamental questions, apart from the research objectives that I began with, was, why research and teach about the Holocaust? Why should I be devoting a considerable amount of my life to something which did not directly affect my country? Now, after 5 years of research, I stand here and I can state not one, but a kaleidoscope of reasons, some of which also overlap with the education guide lists provided by the UNESCO in 2018. So teaching about the Holocaust not only makes one aware about the susceptibility of scapegoating mechanisms, the potential for extreme violence and the abuse of power. Teaching about the Holocaust demonstrates the fragility of societies and of the institutions that are supposed to protect the security and rights of all. It makes one aware about the dangers of prejudice discrimination, and dehumanization, be it anti-Semitism that fueled the Holocaust or other forms of racism and intolerance. It also deepens our reflection about contemporary issues and broadens our understanding of mass violence, which affected the world alike, such as power of extremist ideologies and propaganda. In my PhD thesis, I have only looked at the literary representations of the Holocaust, while giving a brief overview of oral testimonies as well as cinematic and artistic representations. Now, as we all know that literary representations can also be very diffused as a topic. So within this domain, my focus remains on the memoirs and diaries written by women survivors. The reasons for the need of a gendered prism are multifold. The second half of the 20th century saw a plethora of Holocaust narratives. Works such as Survival in Auschwitz by Primo Levi, Night by Eliza Wiesel, The Pianist by Ladislaw Spillman, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen by Tadeusz Borowski, and works such as these depicted extensively the experiences of the survivors in various concentration camps. And they also depicted their survival strategies. Such works dominated the scholarship of Holocaust literature and were considered the touchstones of Holocaust trauma for several decades. Not only this, the peripheral status given to women also exists in the second generation survivor memoirs, such as the most significant and celebrated graphic narrative, Maus, by Art Spiegelman. Throughout both the volumes, women are either excluded from the main narrative or given a marginal status. Not only the narratives, but also the figures associated with the Holocaust were male-oriented. For instance, the figure of the Muselman or the living dead was male-oriented. It was defined as the backbone of the camp and as an anonymous mass of men who march in silence and labor in silence, the divine spark dead within them. Thus, instead of having a story of their own, women existed only in parts where the male protagonists wanted them to exist. A few of the early texts written by female survivors, such as by Gerda Wiesmann, Helena Birnbaum, and Olga Langiel, went either unnoticed or quickly ran out of print. The emanation of women in Holocaust began in the later decades of the 20th century, especially in the 1980s and 90s, when significant changes were occurring in the global milieu. It was a time for the second and third wave of feminism. It was gaining impetus, and it was concerned with issues of equality of women. There were also a host of museums and memorials dedicated to the Holocaust that began to get established during this period, which led to proper documentation of the survivors and victims. And lastly, the definition of trauma underwent a major change. From what was earlier known to be a physical wound, now became a psychic wound. And it, along with the definition of PTSD, that is post-traumatic stress disorder, was given a formal recognition in the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual number 3. Now, when we analyze gendered prism, we find that gender influenced the ways men and women responded to the brutalities of starvation. When the process of ghettoization began, the Jewish men were the first to be arrested because of their physical appearance. Women, apart from providing spiritual comfort to their children during these frequent arrests and deportations, also overtook the role of breadwinners of the families. Young girls also functioned as kasharios, which is female couriers, as they went in and out of the ghetto carrying illegal documents and papers disguised as non-Jews. So they thus served as connecting links between people inside and outside the ghetto. The women were also subjected to brutal and horrific treatments during their time in the concentration camps. And it included searching of the private parts, being employed in brothel houses, and being exchanged as commodities in return for an extra food item. The forced abortions that the expecting mothers had to undergo, which would give them an option of staying alive just for one day or for 1 month. And all the choiceless choices that they had to make for their survival. The effects of this trauma continued well after the liberation, resulting in fractured identities and the belatedness of narrativizing the trauma. Now, regarding the scholarship of women and the Holocaust, one can see that there are a stream of slow but steady narratives right since 1983 till present, and the research is still going on. That makes it kind of more challenging. However, what I find is that majority of these texts are just a factual record of women's experiences and sufferings, or a compilation of essays. Thus, there still exists a lacuna about the lack of representation of the belatedness of women's sufferings and experiences, something which I've explored in my thesis. And my choice of selections stems from the unique aspect of each memoir and diary. Beginning with memoirs, all three of them, Ruth Kluger, Eva Moses Kaur, and Lucelle Eichengreen, came up with additional memoirs, as I term them, or secondary memoirs, with respect to their first ones. So they just added some more paragraphs, modified it as and when their memory served. And I was fortunate enough to get a response from all the three survivors to my questions. I have analyzed this repetition compulsion phenomena of writing memoirs through Dominic Lacapra's theory of fidelity to trauma. So they keep rewriting their memoirs so that nothing is left out. Their memoirs became their narrative catharsis and also their scriptotherapy. The will to live, which is the notion of logotherapy provided by Viktor Frankl, forms a common thread in each of these three. For Ruth Kluger, the will to live came as she was being tattooed in Auschwitz. For Eva, it was when she found 3 naked bodies of children, precisely infants, in the toilet holes. For Lucelle Eichengreen, it occurred when she saw her father's ashes in a matchbox. Now, unlike the memoirs, the Holocaust diaries record the movement of history. The notion of theodicy, given by Rabbi Harold Kushner, that is the idea of bad things happening to good people, forms the common link in writings of these teenage diarists. Ignorant of the next moment, these diarists found it difficult to have faith in the benevolence of God after seeing and hearing about the daily horrors. Through the framework of secondary individuation process, as given by Peter Bloss, I have indulged in a psychological reading of Anna Frank's diary and stated how the physical shift from her home to the secret annex was also accompanied by a psychic shift. Rutka's diary was found 60 years later when her friend Stanislava made its existence public. I was also lucky enough to get in touch with Professor Zahava Scherz, Rutka's half-sister, who, in my interview with her, revealed her journey of discovering the diary. Unlike Anna's diary, it hasn't been subjected to any edits. Mary Burke's diary forms an interesting comparison with the other two. Her diary is actually called a quasi-diary or a diary memoir. She rewrote several passages later, and though Like a diary, she has dates for each entry, but like a memoir, she also has chapter headings. Interestingly, this diary has been translated into one of the Indian languages, which is Marathi. Thus, these diaries present a different outlook towards the same horror of the Holocaust from 3 different locations. I also discussed Alexander Zapruder's book, Salvaged Pages, that analyzes the need for hitherto unknown diarists and attributes the contributions of Meyer Levin as the major force behind Anna Frank's popularity. Now, this gendered approach towards the Holocaust has often faced some daunting opposition from prominent figures like Cynthia Ozick, Helen Fagan, and Ruth Bondi, who opine that Zyklon B, which was the fumigant used in the gas chambers, did not distinguish or differentiate between men and women. They were killed alike. They further maintain that focusing on a particular gender strips the Holocaust of its main theme of atrocity and makes it trivial. However, one can say that women narratives of the Holocaust provide a unique intersection where traumatic lacuna meets the language, as trauma is narrativized in its belatedness. Using gendered response as an alternative way of thinking about the Holocaust is simply to become more attentive to a fuller and deeper understanding of the Holocaust. In my thesis conclusion, while discussing the importance of Holocaust education in the light of anti-Semitic events in the 21st century, I discussed the status of its dissemination in the Indian scenario, which brings me to the next part of my presentation. Unfortunately, in India, there does not exist a proper channel through which Holocaust education can be taught. And Presidency University in Kolkata, where Professor Aafreedi teaches, seems to be the only university in Asia where the subject is being offered. The indifference of the Indian scenario can be attributed to majorly 4 reasons. First, the alienation effect, wherein the Holocaust is viewed as an event of a far-off land and is thus considered alien to India. Second, the overarching shadow of the Indian partition. The Holocaust years were also the time when India was steeped in its freedom struggles, which kind of overshadows the catastrophe of the Holocaust. And more so, sometimes the partition of India is also referred to as the Indian Holocaust. Third, the oblique reference in school textbooks and as an optional course in universities. The Holocaust is mentioned as an oblique reference in the school textbooks. The NCERT textbook, which is the standard school textbook, has an entire chapter of over 100 pages dedicated to Nazism. But the word Holocaust, as you can see, is mentioned only on page 72 and is mentioned only thrice, out of which only one reference has the description, and it's described as the Nazi killing operations. The Delhi University Master's Syllabi has an optional course on violence and memory studies. But firstly, it depends on the number of students taking up that course, which is very few. And secondly, out of the 4 units, only 1 unit, the first one, is dedicated to teaching about the Holocaust, and that too only through one memoir of Primo Levi. There are no suggested readings and nothing else. Lastly, the indifference towards Holocaust education and awareness is fueled by the empowering image of Adolf Hitler. Just to add to what Professor Aafreedi already stated, the name Hitler is used as a brand name for someone who is very authoritative. And so we have Hitler ice cream brands in Uttar Pradesh, one of the states of India, a cloth shop in Ahmedabad again, one of the states of India. And this ice cream brand, interestingly, was started by a person called Neeraj, who, when interviewed, said that his uncle was just like Hitler, authoritative. And he just felt like naming the brand after him. And as you can see, the swastika symbol is without the 4 dots. Along with the 4 dots, the swastika symbol is a very sacred symbol for the people of Hindu faith, Buddhist, and Jainism. The 4 dots have a special significance as they depict right thoughts, right words, right understanding, and right actions. And the 4 arms depict 4 sacred texts, Rig Ved, Atharv Ved, Yajur Ved, and Sam Ved. Not only this, we have pool parlors named as Hitler's Den, and also a cafe in Mumbai named Hitler's Cross. If this isn't enough, there is a website called Colorpore that even sells Hitler merchandise. And the best-selling ones are the cover cases for all brands of cell phones. Again, if this is not enough, Hitler's comic books have made their way into Indian bookshops, where they are placed along with other famous personalities of India and revered characters from religious texts. So as we can see, this empowering image of Hitler is fueled by ignorance and indifference. It becomes very pertinent to view Holocaust as a transnational history or as a transnational catastrophe. During the last year of my research, I found few interesting examples which can form sort of relevant entry points for creating an awareness regarding the Holocaust in India. The first example is of Maharaja Digvijay Singh Ratanjit Singh Jadeja, the Maharaja of Gujarat, and Maharaja means prince or king. In 1942, he gave refuge to 1,000 Polish Jewish children, and hence is popularly called Indian Oskar Schindler. He not only gave them refuge, but also hired teachers for them to educate them, as well as a Polish chef, because the children were not used to eating the spicy Indian food. To honor him, there is a square in Warsaw, Poland, named after him. Now, since the pronunciation of his name is almost a tongue twister, so it's simply called the Square of the Good Maharaja. In addition to this, there is also a school in Warsaw named after him. Next example is of Princess Noor Inayat, famously referred to as Spy Princess, a descendant of Tipu Sultan, who later on became the most celebrated British spy and fought against the Nazis. Shrabani Basu, in her book Spy Princess, provides a realistic account of Noor's life that differs from her previous romanticized accounts. In my interview with Ms. Basu, she revealed the tedious journey of obtaining information regarding her life. Born to a conservative Sufi family, Noor, with her courage, tackled both causes of Indian independence and that of the British. Her brother, Hidayat, was convinced that if she lived, her next cause would be Indian independence. A recent database of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC shows yet another connection. A lady named Louise Angel, born in Mumbai, then Bombay, India, was interned in Drancy internment camp and then deported to Auschwitz with her son, and unfortunately exterminated in 1942. Another welcoming step was seen last month when the Yad Vashem held a certification training program only for Delhi University professors in order to familiarize them with the Holocaust. And I was fortunate enough to attend it, and I hope that this is just the beginning. Along with training programs as these, I see the above examples as entry points that could be explored further, tapped further for creating awareness regarding the Holocaust in India, and would save it from becoming a footnote in history. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Phew. Mehak, that was an absolute tour de force. I have learned so much this evening that I just didn't know about all sorts of things I've learned about, and I thought I was quite well read. Now I'm feeling like there's a lot of work that I have to do. Thank you so very, very much to both you and of course, Dr. Aafreedi. I'm just going to go to the I've got some questions written down here. So before I go to the chat to look for others, I've got some questions. Surabi Yar has asked the question, and I think this was meant for Dr. Aafreedi. What can one do to amplify Holocaust studies in India? And I've added to that to say, are you, Dr. Aafreedi, the lone voice in this huge continent? How can one get this happening?
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's very important for institutions, organizations devoted to raising Holocaust awareness, not to overlook India, not to ignore India. After all, India, if not anything else, it is home to 1/6 of the humankind, point one. Point two, some of the roots of the Islamist anti-Semitism can be traced to India. And I can go on, it can be a long list as to why India is so important, and it just cannot be ignored. Now, the way ahead would be some of the recommendations that I made at the very end of my presentation. And the thing that would be most important is the production of Holocaust pedagogical literature and in Indian languages, and the translation of already existing Holocaust literature into Indian languages, the dubbing of Holocaust cinema in Indian languages, and the training of secondary level teachers in order to enable them to teach Holocaust in schools, and the introduction of Holocaust as a subject at the secondary level of education. It should become part of the official curriculum. These would be the things that we would need to do to raise Holocaust awareness in the country. And as far as my role is concerned, I seriously don't know of anyone at the tertiary level teaching about the Holocaust at any institution of higher education in India.
Dr. Aafreedi, I'm the Director of Education at the Holocaust Center, and our Executive Director, Heather Blumenthal, is on this webinar with us. And I'm sure she would not call me out if I offer the following. We do a lot of teacher training here in South Africa, and I would be delighted to work with you to work out teacher training programs that would fit the Indian model. So let's bear that in mind as something that we could collaborate on collegially. I'd really, really love that. And I'm sure yes,
I would be very happy if I can be of any assistance in this endeavor.
Yes, well, we hope to assist you as well. Now, somebody has said, and it's Joan Rowland, Navras has commented on Muslim denial of the Holocaust. Now that some Muslims are appropriating Holocaust terminology to refer to their situation vis-a-vis Hindutva, has the denial decreased?
The Holocaust denial is a matter of convenience. We have to understand the incentive for denying the Holocaust. Holocaust is denied in the belief that if one is able to successfully prove that the Holocaust never happened, and even if it did not happen at the scale and magnitude at which it is projected to have happened, it would automatically result in the delegitimization of the state of Israel. For Israel as a state, the only justification it can have for its existence is this genocide. And this is this genocide that has enabled the state of Israel and the Zionists to win global sympathy, which led to the establishment of the state. So it is primarily driven by anti-Zionism. They know when they deny the Holocaust that they are denying history. They are distorting history. They are aware of this, and they do so with this awareness. And as I said, the incentive is this belief that if they can prove that the Holocaust never happened, they immediately succeed in delegitimizing the state of Israel. Now, they are increasingly using terminology from the Holocaust when they find themselves in a position which appears to them very similar to the position of the Jews in the initial years of the Nazis, when this fear has turned into an existential crisis for Indian Muslims, that they can be stripped of their citizenship, they can be disenfranchised.
I've got another question. You spoke in your talk, and I was quite surprised by this. You said that individual attacks against individuals are punished by law, but mob attacks seem not to be punished by law. Can you explain this phenomena? Is it I just don't get it. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you. After our Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated in 1984, following her assassination for 3 days, there were massacres of Sikhs because it was her Sikh bodyguards who had assassinated her. So the entire community was held responsible for her assassination. It was her son who later succeeded her as the Prime Minister of India. And within days of that, he gave a speech, which is still available on YouTube. And what he said was interpreted by many people as if he was condoning this violence and even justifying this violence perpetrated upon Sikhs. He said, when a big tree falls, the ground trembles. It shakes. The rate of it happened in 1984. We are now in 2022. And as we speak, the rate of conviction in this episode, in cases related to 1984 anti-Sikh violence, is less than 1%. Less than 1%. That is the rate of conviction. Now, I could speak confidently, in particular, about this case because I remembered the figure of less than 1%. But even in other episodes of mass violence, which are unfortunately many, the rate of conviction isn't any better than this.
Thank you. I'm just looking to see, are there any other questions from participants? Because I've got tons more. There are so many wonderful comments to both our speakers. Thank you so much. I'm really indebted to you both for such informative presentations. I just want to find, this is so fascinating. Okay, so Mehak, you've answered the question about books about texts that deal with homosexuals. I'm just trying to find, because everybody's been raving about you guys, so I'm really, really thrilled. Dr. Navras Aafreedi and Ms. Mehak Burza, your excellent scholarship is inspiring. You are building a structure for Holocaust education in India that will transform understanding about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, as well as all forms of hatred. May your work lead other scholars outside of India to build a similar foundation for Holocaust education in their countries. And that's from Jennifer Zunikov. Unless there are any more questions, I think there are four new messages. Let me just check, please, that they are not specific questions. Speakers, may we put in the chat your email addresses? People want to contact you. Yes. Okay, Justine.
Most welcome.
Good. Justine, may I ask you please just to write both Mehak and Navras's email addresses so that people can contact them. And yes, this is being recorded, and we will have a link which we will send to everybody who registered. That was another question. And I'm really sorry, Beth, it's Beth Chernoff. This has been going on since 7 o'clock our time. I'm afraid you've missed a wonderful thing, but don't worry, because you will get the link and be able to watch it. So I think with that, I'm going to once again thank our remarkable speakers. Honestly, when we got together and were chatting, I did not expect such a marvelous, marvelous evening of education. Mehak, your talk was just, it blew me away. Navras, you know how much I admire you, so thank you very much. And we will be in touch, and we will, because I really would like to talk to you about how we can maybe create teacher workshops in India. We have it so organized here that we've got tons that we can share and work together on. So I'd really, really like to do that with you. And from me, it's good night to everybody. Thank you all for coming. I just want to quickly see that I'm not forgetting anyone. Oh, everyone is just saying thank you, thank you, thank you. Everyone loved it, as did I. And so there's something in the Q&A. Hold on. Oh, it's Beth. Okay, I think that's it. I think I've covered everything. I don't think anybody's going to be angry that their question wasn't asked. And if they are, they'll have your email addresses. So, Etty Zilber's asking, where are the email addresses? And I think something was said about it being sent with the link. I think so. I think so. When you get the link, you'll get all of their details as well. So look out for that. Okay. Shukriya. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night. Thank you for joining us.